Well, good evening, everybody, from day 11 here at COP29. Crunch time here at the event, and as usual, to analyse the day's events, I'm here with Anastasia Lavrina and Orkan Amashov. Now, an awful lot has happened in the last few hours. Let's just recap what has taken place. We've had a speech by the UN Secretary General. He has used many different ways to call for parties to reach an agreement. He's spoken about the clock being ticking, time being short, asking people to pick up the pace, stressing that the need is urgent. Then we've also seen earlier this afternoon all parties getting together to review this latest version of the draft text of the agreement. Since then, that initial meeting has turned into a continuous meeting where parties are discussing all manner of facets of that agreement. So we are hoping that very, very soon the redrafting process, the continued negotiations, that could lead to some kind of bigger agreement. Anastasia, what do you think is likely to happen in the next few hours?
Now we can see how the representatives of different countries are able to express the position of their countries. We can see how developing countries say that they need more than $1 trillion. So they are still keen to get financial support, significant financial support from the developed countries in order to proceed with the climate change inside their countries, in their territories. At the same time, rich countries have been resistant, and it's not clear about the amount of money they are willing to provide, they're willing to share within the next year and years. Like the United States of America and some members of the European Union, they do not mention the clear number on how exactly they are willing to join this agreement with which amount of money. And of course, developing countries are not satisfied with this. They want to see the precise numbers, the precise agreements and commitments of the developed countries to move forward all together without any barriers, but with a bridge which will unite. And there was a very good phrase today I heard: failure is not an option. When COP29 ends tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, there should be an agreement which will bring the countries on one stage to make sure that they will proceed with the achieved results. Actually, what's interesting, that COP29 presidency here in Azerbaijan feeling quite optimistic. They are sure that the countries will use the opportunity as the final day of discussions in order to achieve any kind of agreement which will definitely benefit all the countries. And of course, we can understand disappointment at the lack of specific figures, as I already mentioned, but still there is an opportunity that tomorrow, most probably, there will be an announcement on the agreements of some specific issues related to finance deal, cut fossil fuels, which was also on the agenda, and adaptation to climate change.
So some compromise clearly taking place, Orkan, some optimism, some very strong words. We've heard many different delegations making their points heard. Earlier, I was struck by the representative from the Republic of Korea, who made the case for a pragmatic and practical approach to negotiations. He said a perfect solution is unattainable, so all parties need to take a step back. Is that what's required now, do you think? More pragmatism, more compromise?
That was required from the very beginning, actually. Now we reached a point where we have to make a decision. That decision, of course, is not going to be the ideal, perfect decision, but that should be made whatever the cost may be. And when I say the cost, effectively, we are moving away from our initial ambitions. What Secretary General of UN, Antonio Guterres, said today, early this afternoon, is that perhaps we will need to reconsider our initial ambition in order to reach consensus. And consensus will mean that both parties should reconsider their earlier positions. My feeling is that compromise will emerge eventually. There's no chance that compromise will not emerge. But the fundamental question for me is that compromise, will it be a meaningful compromise wherein actually the substance of our initial ambition will be retained? If you consider this particular proposition in the context of climate finance goal, of course, 3 different packages are considered. One is extreme $1.3 trillion. Does not look very achievable at this juncture, but who knows. 400 billion package also considered. I think the middle ground could be found, and that's probably going to be around 600 billion package. But beyond figure, what we notice here is that we have noticed quite a considerable portion of virtue signaling during the meetings today. Those countries who do not need to do quite a lot about mitigation, they are focusing on mitigation. Those countries who do not need to do much about adaptation, they're focusing on adaptation. But what we realize on the basis of what we have heard today, that meeting is still underway, by the way, it's open-ended, the single setting meeting, which is currently underway. The developed countries are not really focusing on a particular figure. They're always saying that this issue is very complex and we need to have ambitious NDCs, national determined contributions, national adaptation plans, and for them figure is only peripheral to the whole structure, whereas from the perspective of developing countries, figure is indeed very important, because we have to go back to the agenda of COP29. So we have to raise our ambition. Raising ambition means ambitious NDCs, the biennial transparency reports, and some other elements. But to enable that ambition, we need to allocate money, and that enabling is all about NCQG. So my feeling is that, of course, negotiations are underway. I hope that by tomorrow there will be some compromise solution, but it looks like that compromise will also mean reduction of the initial ambition. My hope is that that reduction will not culminate in the reduction of the substance. That's my fundamental concern.
It's very interesting. And understandably, Anastasia, we're all focused on this number and what it will be and how long it will take to get there. But you've also been looking at some other very important factors too, haven't you? The role of gender in this work.
Exactly. Today is the Gender Day at COP29, and of course, women are trying to bring the global attention to how climate change affects the gender equality. And coming back to what my colleagues just mentioned, he said about the division among the approach of developing and developed countries to the final agreement. And it's very important to mention that one of my respondents, woman, she said that we think that global north should support the countries from the global south in the policy related to climate change, whether it's about education, whether it's about gender equality or any other issue, ecotourism, as developed countries need to spend more, as they also previously, with their productivity and other things, also violated some international norms and rules related to sustainability. That's why they need to take more responsibilities. And when it comes to the gender equality issues, there were three fundamental issues mentioned. The first one is the importance of raising awareness about these problems, as in some countries and international communities, people do not understand exactly how climate change affects the gender equality. The second issue is that international institutions and the United Nations itself should prepare the reports which will be distributed among the member states, again, to raise the awareness about this problem. And the third issue, to make the voice of women to be heard. Women must take the active role, active participation in the decision-making process. If we lack of this, then women's voice and their position are staying neglected. And that's why it's also affect the decision-making process. And climate change affects the women, the girls, the most vulnerable part of our society. We have to accept this reality. So, and the solution on how it may prevent the future problems to appear in the international and the global scale, there are two options they see. They mention the role of government and governmental institutions and the role of non-governmental organizations who should get additional support to distribute the financial benefits among the women and girls all around the globe. So these are the fundamental issues which were raised by the participants today at COP29 in different plenary sessions.
So yeah, very important, Orkan, that all voices are heard. And we have been hearing some strong opinions during these negotiations. I was struck by what you said earlier about some brinkmanship perhaps going on amongst the delegation, about delegations understandably pushing for action in areas that would be easier for them to adapt to. Do you talk to us a bit more about that?
Yeah, there is an element of self-interest here, I think, that which is very noticeable when you listen to those speeches which are currently delivered. Of course, if you look at the United States of America, of course, we understand that they've got thriving oil and gas industry, their output is increasing, and their carbon footprint is flattish at this current juncture. The feeling there is that, of course, they do not want to commit themselves to anything in terms of figures. We also notice that there are divisions within that developed world bloc between European Union and the United States, of course. There have been some talk about Donald Trump potentially withdrawing the United States from the Paris Agreement, and it is deemed by European Union, by Brussels, as a window of opportunity to do something now, because later, with Trump administration in charge, some decisions will be very difficult to get through. So you see the divisions there as well. Of course, from the perspective of European Union and EU countries, of course, they will be very ambitious about mitigation, because the increasing renewable capacity, doubling energy efficiency, cutting emissions from their perspective, bearing in mind their current circumstances, it's easy to do. But when it comes to those countries with growing population, growing demand for energy, actually being very ambitious about mitigation is not very feasible. So you see this game, this politics being played out, which is perfectly understandable, of course. But if we are really genuinely concerned about the future of our planet, if we're worried about climate crisis, we need to take action now. And action requires money. And the sense there is that all developed countries over the past 200 years, they have contributed to this progress, they benefited from that progress, and now they do not want to pay that price for that progress which benefited them. I think that's a feeling which is very, very strongly felt on the Global South camp. And what Global North countries are now saying is that we have to look at this burden not just from the perspective of our responsibility. The responsibility must be divided, of course, and they believe that China and other countries must contribute as well. China is willing to help, of course, but not under the scheme of shared burden. So we, in the context of China-US confrontation, we see the emanation of this confrontation and its entrenchment within the climate crisis dialogue between the parties at this stage. But my fundamental feeling is that it is upon the conscience of all parties involved here to reach a consensus. I think that consensus will be reached. I cannot exclude the possibility of delay, but my only worry, and it's a very genuine worry that I feel now, is that whether we will lose too much from that initial ambition, whether what we're going to lose is going to militate against our ambition or not. This is a question to which there's no clear answer at this stage, I'm afraid.
No, quite right. Well, thank you both very much, as always, for your analysis. So some big questions still remain. Will that elusive big agreement on climate finance be reached? If it is reached, as Orkan reminded us, will it be reached in a way that dilutes the grand and noble ambition of this work? We'll find out answers to that, I'm sure, tomorrow. Do stay with us here on AnewZ, where we'll keep you up to date on every element of this ongoing negotiation here at COP29.